This observer was the prince. All but frightened, he suddenly stepped forward mechanically. "Drink some water," he whispered to Ganya, "and don't stare like that." It was evident that he had said it without any calculation, without any particular design, just so, on the first impulse, but his words produced an extraordinary effect. It seemed that all of Ganya's spite suddenly poured out on the prince. He seized him by the shoulder and looked at him silently, vengefully, and hatefully, as if unable to utter a word. There was general agitation. Nina Alexandrovna even gave a little cry. Tin took a step forward in alarm. Kolya and Ferdishchenko appeared in the doorway and stopped in amazement. Varya alone watched as sullenly as before, but observed attentively. She did not sit down, but stood to one side, next to her mother, her arms folded on her breast. But Ganya came to his senses at once, almost at the moment of his reaction, and laughed nervously. He recovered completely. "What are you, Prince, a doctor or something?" he cried as gaily and simple-heartedly as he could. "He even frightened me. Nastasia Philippovna, allow me to introduce this precious specimen to you, though I myself met him only this morning." Nastasia Philippovna looked at the prince in perplexity. "Prince? He's a prince? Imagine, and just now, in the front hall, I took him for a lackey and sent him to announce me." "Ha, ha, ha. No harm, no harm." Ferdishchenko picked up, approaching hastily and delighted that they had begun to laugh. "No harm, say Nani Vero, 32. And I all but scolded you, Prince. Forgive me, please." "Ferdishchenko, what are you doing here at such an hour?" "I thought I'd at least not find you here." "Who? Prince what? Mishkin?" she repeated to Ganya, who, still holding the prince by the shoulder, meanwhile managed to introduce him. "Our tenant," repeated Ganya. Obviously, the prince was being presented as something rare, and useful to them all as a way out of a false situation. He was, if it's not true, almost shoved at Nastasia Philippovna. The prince even clearly heard the word idiot whispered behind him, probably by Ferdishchenko, in explanation to Nastasia Philippovna. Tell me, why didn't you undeceive me just now, when I made such a terrible mistake about you? Nastasia Philippovna went on, scrutinizing the prince from head to foot in a most unceremonious manner. She impatiently awaited the answer, as if fully convinced that the answer was bound to be so stupid that it would be impossible not to laugh. I was astonished, seeing you so suddenly, the prince murmured. And how did you know it was me? Where have you seen me before? In fact, it's as if I have seen him somewhere. Why is that? And, allow me to ask you, why did you stand there so dumbstruck just now? What's so dumbstriking about me? Well, so? Ferdishchenko kept clowning. Well, and so? Oh, Lord, what things I'd say to such a question. Well, so, what a booby you are, Prince, after this. And what things I'd say, too, in your place. The prince laughed to Ferdishchenko. I was very struck by your portrait today, he went on to Nastasia Philippovna. Then I talked about you with the Epanchins, and early in the morning, still on the train, before I arrived in Petersburg, Parfen Rogozhin told me a lot about you, and at the very moment when I opened the door, I was also thinking about you, and suddenly there you were. But how did you recognize me? From the portrait and also because that was precisely how I imagined you. It's as if I've also seen you somewhere. Where? Where? As if I've seen your eyes somewhere, but that can't be. I've never even been here before. Maybe in a dream. Bravo, Prince! Cried Ferdishchenko. No, I take back my say non e vero. But anyhow, it's all just his innocence. He added with regret. The prince had spoken his few phrases in an uneasy voice, faltering and stopping frequently to catch his breath. Everything about him betrayed extreme agitation. Nastasia Philippovna looked at him with curiosity, but was no longer laughing. Just then a loud new voice was suddenly heard from behind the crowd that closely surrounded the prince and Nastasia Philippovna, parting the crowd, as it were, and dividing it in two. Before Nastasia Philippovna stood the father of the family, General Ivolgin himself. He was wearing a tailcoat and a clean shirt front, his mustache was dyed. This was more than Ganya could bear. Proud and vainglorious to the point of insecurity, of hypochondria, seeking all those 2 months for at least some point on which he could rest with a certain dignity and show himself nobly, feeling himself still a novice on the chosen path, who might fail to keep to it, finally, in despair, having resolved to become totally insolent in his own house, where he was a despot, but not daring to show the same resolve before Nastasia Philippovna, who went on confusing him until the last moment and mercilessly kept the upper hand, an impatient pauper, in Nastasia Philippovna's own phrase, of which he had been informed, having sworn with all possible oaths to exact painful recompense for it later, and at the same time occasionally dreaming childishly to himself of making all ends meet and reconciling all opposites. He now had to drink this terrible cup as well and, above all, at such a moment. One more unforeseen but most awful torture for a vainglorious man, the torment of blushing for his own family and his own house, fell to his lot. Is the reward finally worth it? Flashed in Ganya's head at that moment. What, for those 2 months, he had dreamed of only at night, as a nightmare which had made him freeze with horror and burn with shame, was taking place at that very moment. A family meeting was finally taking place between his father and Nastasia Philippovna. Occasionally, teasing and chaffing himself, he had tried to imagine the general during the wedding ceremony, but he had never been able to finish the painful picture and had hastily abandoned it. Perhaps he had exaggerated the disaster beyond measure, but that is what always happens with vainglorious people.